in light of the fact that this is Women's History Month, this week we're going to be sharing a story about a woman who pretty much has like the most epic passion project of all time, right? Like there are a lot of people in history that have had like these amazing ideas and just these awesome inventions and things, but this is a woman who I think did something really, really important to her, and maybe it changed over time and like how it was received. But I just wanted to talk about this because she, for her time, I think she was really ahead of her time in the sense of like women achieving things that they really cared about, that they just were interested in. I don't know, let's get into it.
Yeah, I want to hear about this woman.
Okay, so I didn't tell you who I was going to be talking about.
No.
I know we wanted to speak about somebody, and just like kind of do a little bit of research. And this specific story, I got my sources from Washington City Paper, womenshistory.org, Smithsonian Magazine, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and also landlordsgame.info. So Elizabeth Lizzie Maggie's story begins in 1866, rural Illinois. Her father was a feminist in both his work life and his personal life, and passed his progressive ideology on to Elizabeth. You'll better understand the significance of her upbringing a bit later, but just know that she was truly ahead of her time, like thanks to her dad. Before her 20th birthday, she went off to work as a stenographer and typist at the Dead Letter Office, which I actually had never heard about. Have you heard of the Dead Letter Office?
No, I was actually going to ask, what's a stenographer? I'm sorry, maybe I'm dumb.
A stenographer, it's funny because I wasn't exactly sure about that either, and I did not look that up. But I know that she was also a typist there, so I know that she was in charge of typing things. I don't know.
A stenographer is a person trained to type or write in shorthand methods.
Oh, okay.
Oh, so it's like the people that
so like a recorder.
It's like the people at the court.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So
sorry.
That's interesting. So apparently the Dead Letter Office was a mail sorting office where mostly women would sort through mystery mail and get it rerouted to where it needed to go. At the time, the Civil War was happening, so there was a lack of males in the workforce, and that's why this office was mostly run by women, along with a lot of other industries at the time. So just a small tidbit. She was, starting her career, or like, starting to work, and she was completely surrounded by women. So I'm sure that kind of like also helped frame her mindset about like the possibilities in life, right?
Yeah.
So when Elizabeth was 26, she received her inventor badge when she patented an improvement to the typewriter. So I looked up the patent, and it's basically a complete foreign language to me, but Mary Pilon explains it as basically allowing more type on a single page. So she just made it a lot easier for the page to like roll through the typewriter, which is interesting. And this patent would be a huge deal now. So imagine how nuts it was at the time when women were credited less than 1% of all patents.
Wow.
Trailblazer, right?
You know what? The job I had when I was in college, in the office, we had a typewriter. So I'm just like, wow, that's really cool, because we'd actually have to use the typewriter to write stuff for checks. So you just saying that, I'm like, oh, wow.
That's amazing, because really cool. That wasn't too long ago, right? That was like, what, 5 years ago or something?
Probably like 7 now.
Yeah. We used to use a typewriter when I was growing up. We didn't have a computer that could actually print stuff. So if I had to type something for school, we were sitting at the kitchen table with a typewriter. Mom had a typewriter.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. Sorry, just you saying that, I'm like, I've actually used a typewriter, so that's actually really cool.
Yeah. So all in all, Elizabeth basically invented the term multi-hyphenate. For the next 20 years, she would work as a writer of short stories and poems. She was a comedian. She was a stage actress. She would create as a development and product designer. She was an engineer, and she even did a small stint as a news reporter. So
she hustled. Yeah. Very impressive.
When I was reading this, I was like, she's basically Jared Leto of the 1800s. Do you know who Jared Leto is?
No, I don't, but I just thought I should laugh. Like I've heard his name before. I just don't know who he is.
You know 30 Seconds to Mars? The band?
No.
You know the Joker?
Which Joker?
The one with the silver teeth
What?
with Harley Quinn?
Wait. You're saying the Joker
The
is
new Joker. Yeah.
No. I didn't ever watch those because I heard they weren't that amazing. But I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. We're moving on.
It's okay. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So remember I was talking about Elizabeth's progressive feminist dad?
Mhm.
Well, he was also an economist and introduced Elizabeth to the concept of Georgism, which stemmed from a book called Progress and Poverty. It was written by Henry George. Georgism was also known as the single tax movement, which believed that individuals should own 100% of what they made or created, but that everything found in nature, particularly land, should belong to everybody. Henry George essentially believed that landlords were parasites and that people should not be taxed for their wages, but instead owners of land should be expected to pay for government and social welfare with the huge profits they made from collecting rent, which is interesting. It's an interesting, I've never heard of that concept.
No, yeah, that's interesting.
But it makes sense. I'm kind of a believer. So Elizabeth became an activist for this belief system early on in her life because she was introduced to it by her dad, right? And in her late 30s, she invented a game that she hoped would help people to grasp the concept. So
is it Monopoly?
This is what her passion project was.
It's not Monopoly, right?
This game was called the Landlord's game.
Okay.
And allowed players to choose one of two methods of play. One method was called prosperity, where all players were rewarded when wealth was created. The other method would encourage players to buy as much land and to beat the competition. This method was called Monopoly. No!
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I'm surprised that you guessed it, but I guess it kind of makes sense. Yeah, it's like, yeah. And in 1902, there was an issue of the Single Tax Review where she wrote about her game. She says, it's a practical demonstration of the present system of land grabbing with all its usual outcomes and consequences. It might well have been called the game of life, as it contains all the elements of success and failure in the real world. And the object is the same as the human race in general seems to have, the accumulation of wealth. Right?
Yeah.
In 1903, she patented the game. And 3 years later, she wanted to start distributing the game and created Economic Game Company with fellow Georgists. So you can add entrepreneur and CEO to her titles, right? But the game was already pretty popular on the streets before it was even published. People were hearing about it and creating their own versions that were played at work, home, and everywhere. Although it had a purpose, people played it how they wanted, and this was how Charles Darrow came to learn about the game. But before we get to him, let's go back to Elizabeth Maggie, the development designer. So in 1910, she owned the game company called Economic Game Company and entered into a deal with Parker Brothers to create a game called Mock Trial. According to an original Parker Brothers ad for the game, Mock Trial is full of ludicrous fun, merriment, and joy, and will put a room full of players in a continuous state of laughter, which is very, very different from her board game concept. Because obviously Landlord's game is super serious, right? It's like there's like a point to it.
Yeah.
But it was their introduction to her as a game designer, right? Like this was the first time they were working with her, they were meeting her, they knew her name. So around this time, this company based in Scotland totally knocked off her game, the Landlord's game. This company was called the Newbie Game Company, and they made some revisions, but pretty much kept the concept the same. My understanding is she was not aware of this because it was released in Scotland, but it wouldn't be the last time her idea was repurposed, obviously, right? Shortly after, she gets married. She's 44 now. Presumably lives in bliss for 20 years, and then her patent expires. So she submits a patent for the revised version of the game in 1924. It's essentially the same, but it has some updates, and she hopes that she can kind of get back some of the control she's lost over time. Keep in mind that in the 20-something years since she originally published her board game, people have made copies for private use and have even revised the game to make it more personal for themselves. It's a fun game for all, and she learned over time that the majority of people preferred to play the Monopoly method because it was the most intense. Did you guys ever play Monopoly growing up?
Yeah, if I was the banker, I always cheated and gave myself more money.
So rude.
And I would just be like, I can afford everything.
You're so rude. Everyone's like, how did you end up with like $57,000?
Well, because like, when you're giving people their change, you just go and you just take a little. I was a really bad child, but I never won. I noticed every time I cheated, I lost.
Interesting.
Because at the end, everyone gets very serious and then they watch the banker more. But in the beginning, you can kind of finesse.
Yeah, I was one of those people where I was just like, I hated cheaters. I would be like watching like a hawk. But I always had people in my family cheating all the time. It was so annoying.
I just wanted to win against my brothers because they were always like, neener, neener. You're a girl. Well, they wouldn't say you're a girl. They'd be like, you're little, so you can't play.
Did you guys have any house rules?
No, not. I mean, we would. No. Yeah, no, we didn't have any house rules. We would just kind of read the directions. And then if we had any like fights, the game, like my brothers would just blow up and then we'd just stop playing.
They would just like toss over the game
Pretty
and like
much.
the board and just like storm out.
You have no idea. I mean, actually, I think you've been around when we played Yu-Gi-Oh! And how serious it got, right? You've been around.
Yeah.
So imagine that, but with Monopoly.
That's intense.
Yeah.
It gets pretty serious. In 1932, Elizabeth publishes the second edition of the Landlord's Game with Ad Game Company based in Washington, D.C. It's around this time when a man named Charles Darrow is taught to play the game using the Monopoly method and absolutely falls in love with it. He took the idea, patented his own version of the game in 1935 with all of the illustrations that you see on the game, like the little trains, and he incorporates the use of those little pieces, right? The little tin pieces that apparently he took, like it was like there were charms on his daughter's bracelet that, yeah, which is interesting, I guess.
So she had like a hat.
She had like these little charms on her bracelet, and so I guess he was inspired by that. Maybe. Imagine like there was like a little shoe on her charm. I don't know, that'd be cool. He took the idea and patented his own version of the game in 1935, and then he presented the idea for his game, he called it Monopoly, to Parker Brothers only 3 years after Elizabeth had published her second edition of her game. Parker Brothers would eventually go on to release super popular games like Scrabble, Risk, Clue, and more, but at the time they had one bestseller, which was a card game. It was like literally a non-denominational playing card deck called Rook, where basically like they took the ace, the queen, the king, and they replaced them with numbers. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was a bestseller, but like that was literally the game that they had. And so they purchased his Monopoly and proceeded to develop the game. Having worked with Elizabeth on another game in the past, it can be assumed that they'd seen the concept before. So it can also be determined that to eliminate any legal issues that might arise, they did the following. They approached Elizabeth and purchased her game patent for the Landlord's Game and a couple of her patents for other games with similar themes for a total of $500, which today would be $10,260.
I would not have agreed.
She was stoked. She was super happy, but that's why I'm sure she had no idea what their intentions were behind the purchase. I'm sure she thought, oh, this game's going to be developed now by them. But that didn't happen. Monopoly ended up being a game that we're all very familiar with. I don't think I have to explain what it is, so I won't. But some of the major differences between the original and the final Monopoly we all know and love is in the language. For example, the Go space, what many of us know as the Redeemer space, or where you collect a small sum that sometimes brings you back into the game long enough to turn and look around, right?
Yeah. That
space originally had the picture of a globe with the words "Labor upon Mother Earth produces wages." So you would still get $100. It's a little lengthy, the message, right? But you'd still get your $100 for passing go. But the concept behind this was that you should be aware that nothing is truly free, and there's a bigger price to pay for passing go.
So they literally just like took out the whole meaning of it.
Yeah, they
like
just simplified it, and it ended up, celebrating this capitalistic thought process or idea.
Yeah, because to me, when you play, the whole point is just to get super rich and like out maneuver everyone else, right? That's pretty much the whole game. Because you just pretty much play until everyone else is broke, like goes broke, right? That's the whole point.
Yeah. And apparently she did it because she was just super anti Rockefeller and Carnegie, right? Andrew Carnegie. And they were just like these huge billionaire, whatever. I don't know at the time if there was a billionaire. But they were just like these huge, they owned everything. And so she wanted to show how that's bad. Like this is how you create a 1% versus a 99. And people loved it. Unfortunately, years later, she was never credited with even contributing to the game's concept or creation. And that's where I have a problem, because it's one thing if they only paid her $10,000, but like at least put her into like the credits or whatever, like put her, give her the credit that she's due, that she came up with this concept.
Technically, if they paid for it though, then they probably didn't have to.
Exactly.
Right?
Legally, they didn't need to because they bought the patent. So technically they owned it.
And I know that does suck, but like in technicality, they didn't do anything wrong, I suppose. But I do understand. I think it's really crappy. I don't know. Are we allowed to say crappy? Mm-hmm. Okay. Sorry. We're still trying to figure out our wording for this. I think it was, not great that they did that.
Yeah, it's pretty messed up. Apparently, the only reason we know about her patent is because this economist created his own game called Anti-Monopoly, where basically it was kind of the same thing. He was like trying to, fight the capitalist idea with his game. And of course, Parker Brothers came after him and said, you can't use the part of the word, I guess, opoly in your name. And also this is based off of our game. You can't do that. And so apparently he was in a decades-long legal battle with them. And so in his own digging, he found the patent, and then he exposed them for all of this in his book called The $1 Billion Monopoly Swindle. And apparently he ended up winning the legal battle, I think, because of the fact that they actually stole the idea. They paid for it, but they still took it.
Yeah. That's crazy. Wow. I had no idea there was this much drama about Monopoly. Like, that's pretty surprising.
Yeah. And aside from just the concept of the game, she's actually the inventor of what is called the circular board game, which is basically the concept of making your way around the board. That she was the first one.
Wow.
Yeah. That's pretty huge. And although her contributions are more widely known today because of what was discovered, it sucks. It's unfortunate that she couldn't be celebrated or have reaped the benefits of her work while she was alive. So from an article in 1902, Elizabeth states, children learn that the quickest way to accumulate wealth and gain power is to get all the land they can in the best localities and hold on to it. There are those who argue that it may be a dangerous thing to teach children how they may thus get the advantage of their fellows. But let me tell you, there are no fair-minded beings in the world than our own little American children. She continues, let the children once see clearly the gross injustice of our present land system, and when they grow up, if they are allowed to develop naturally, the evil will soon be remedied. And that's the story of Elizabeth Maggie.
That's actually really, really cool. Like, I mean, it's like a really sad story, but I had no idea. I just assumed some man came up with Monopoly because there's an old man on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, literally. The apparent, I don't know, I actually didn't check my copy of Monopoly to see if this is still the case, but there's like a little story that would come with the original Monopoly that told the story of Charles Darrow and how he came up with the concept. So it just would have been nice to have her credited in there, because yeah. But the reason I wanted to tell her story today was because she always went after what she cared about. She wasn't focused on the money. And a lot of times we are kind of like stopped from doing things that we really care about or we feel like we should be doing in our heart because we're focused on, providing for our family and all those things. And so a lot of times we can't do those things. But if you do have a little bit of time to focus on something that truly means something to you, it's worthwhile. Just, carve out any little time that you have to do something that truly means something to you, because, this was her passion project. Unfortunately, it ended up the way that it did, but it's just awesome to see that she was able to do something that she truly believed in. And she took all the steps to really push that and put that out in the world. And, you know, yes, many families have probably been torn apart because of it, but
Really? Dang, Christy, you really need some coffee.
I need some coffee.